Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Collins. I'm here with my dad, JL Collins, and we're really excited to spend some time and answer some questions around the simple path to wealth.
Hi everyone, I'm the father alluded to there, JL Collins, and it's always a delight to be with my daughter and a lot of fun answering questions with her, both to think of what answers I come up with, but also to listen to what she comes up with. So I think we're pretty much on the same page at this point. Wasn't always that way. Well, in terms of lessons for me on teaching your kid anything, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because the whole reason the book exists is because I managed to turn her off to all things financial when she was very young because I pushed it too soon and too hard. So I'm not sure that I have great lessons to offer there, unless you want to do that and then later write a book that she can read.
Invest aggressively in VTSAX and stay for the long haul. Um, the market's always volatile, but it's always going to go up. So just be patient, keep your head down, keep adding money to it. As I've gotten older, I think my brain has allowed me to uncover some of the other lessons that maybe I wasn't willing to accept as a younger child, or maybe I just didn't understand them as a younger child, but as an adult, they've kind of become more relatable. And I think they're not so much lessons, but they're just ideas of what money can buy you, the importance of it, understanding really how vital something like FU money can be, and using your money to just buy the things and the experiences and the time that you want. Those are the things that I think have kind of become more obvious to me and more valuable to me as an adult. Whereas I think when I was little, it was just VTSAX.
When deciding how much help to give Jess when she was a young person, I went back to my own youth and my experience there because my dad had been a pretty successful guy, but he was a cigarette smoker, and over time, cigarettes destroyed his health, and along with it, his ability to earn. So where he was able, for instance, to put both my older sisters through college, when it was my turn, there was no money for that. So I determined pretty early on and said this to Jess when she was still in high school that your job is to get into the best college you can. My job is to figure out how to pay for it. But the caveat was I would pay for the basics, room, board, tuition, books. But if she wanted anything else like clothes or going out for her friends, she was required to work. I worked when I was young and I thought it was a great experience. I enjoyed my jobs when I was in high school and then in college. So I didn't want to deprive her of that. So that's kind of how I thought about it. And then a corollary of that, I remember years ago at a Chautauqua, at one of the dinners, I was talking to a couple of attendees and they had young children and they got on the subject of, are you going to leave money to your child? And what my thoughts were on that. And I remember saying at the time, well, she's too young for me to know yet because I'm certainly not going to leave money to her unless I'm convinced that she is able to handle it. Because you can literally kill someone by giving them money they're not prepared to handle. And I just certainly didn't want that for my child. And so I said, I'm going to wait and see how she turns out and whether she can actually handle money if I wind up leaving it to her. Uh, what I didn't anticipate at the time was, first of all, she turned out great. And I have absolute confidence that she can handle money now. But because she did, she no longer needs my money. She has her own. So the great irony is that if she proved that she was able to handle it, she wouldn't need it. And if she wasn't able to handle it, needed it, I wouldn't be willing to give it to her.
Expectation that was sent when I was getting ready to go to college was that my parents would cover everything that I needed, but I was responsible for everything that I wanted. From the beginning, always made a ton of sense to me. And I actually loved it. I worked when I was at school, I worked at my university's library. And then when I was on break, so whether that was like Christmas break or summer break, there was a restaurant in the town, my hometown, where my parents were that I would work at. and I was a hostess at one and a waitress at the other. And I loved it. I thought it was great. It was the first time, besides babysitting, which I did in middle school and high school, where it felt like an actual adult job. And I had a lot of fun with it. And so looking back on it now, it's kind of interesting that that agreement never bothered me. It always just made a lot of sense that that was how we were gonna move forward with my parents. They were going to cover whatever was needed. So whether that was books, I had a basic meal plan, tuition, but anything extra that I wanted was on me, and that always made a lot of sense to me. I never had any hesitations or ever felt the need to push against that. I never had the expectation growing up that I was going to get any money, that I was going to inherit anything. So it wasn't, I'm teaching you this so that I can give you a bunch of money. It was, I'm teaching you this so you can manage your own money. And so I always had the attitude, and it was always this kind of unspoken thing of, well, yeah, like I'm gonna do this myself. From my point of view, anybody who is trying to get their children interested and engaged and investing, I don't know if I'm the right person to ask because I wasn't. And in a lot of ways, I'm still not. I am engaged in investing now as an adult because I understand more about the life that I want to live and what money can buy me as far as freedom and flexibility to have the jobs that I want and the life that I want. But as a kid, I was not engaged. And I don't think there's anything really that my parents could have done differently to get me more interested or engaged from a young age because I had a really stable childhood. And when you have a really stable childhood, there is a lot of time to just focus on the fun stuff and focus on yourself, and be selfish like we all are as children. And so thinking about investing really wasn't anything I was ever interested in. And I don't know that I have an answer on what somebody can do to pique that interest in their own child.
So I guess mine comes in terms of how to indoctrinate your kid in things financial. When I reflect back on it, I think there were two things that helped. One was simply the way my wife and I conducted our lives and the way Jessica was raised to see that. When we moved to New Hampshire, for instance, we moved to a fairly wealthy neighborhood, and candidly, we were just as wealthy as most people in that neighborhood, maybe a little bit more so, but that's not the way we lived. So we lived much more modestly, and that's what Jessica saw at the same time that a lot of her peers, their families were living more extravagant lives. So maybe that was part of the lesson. The other thing is, and I joke about how I push this stuff too soon, too hard, and I think there's some truth to that. But my wife used to tell me, she's absorbing more than she lets on. And I used to say, well, if she's absorbing anything, that's more than she's letting on, because I had no indication of that at all. But looking back, I think that was true. And so I would say just, put the lessons out there. And even if the kids don't seem to be paying attention or absorbing it, at some level they probably are, particularly if what you're teaching is backed up by what they see and how you're living.
If I could just add on to that, I think that is 100% what happened to me. I think watching my parents live a certain lifestyle had more of an impact than what they were trying to verbally teach me. And I will say, practicing what you preach will go a long way with children because I honestly thought that this was common knowledge. I honestly thought that every parent was having all of these conversations with their kids. I thought it was normal to have a monthly conversation over the most recent statement from Vanguards to talk about dividends and interest. And Dad's smirking right now, but I see, like, I don't know any different. And you don't talk about this stuff with your friends because why would I talk about this stuff with my friends when we're in the sixth grade? So I think a part of me just assumed that everyone lived like this and that everyone was having these conversations and everybody knew about investing and how to think about money and how to think about what your money could buy. And I think with that thought of, well, my parents are just droning on about something that like everyone is going to know, everyone knows about, and then being an adult and realizing that nobody talked about this. Not only do people not talk about finances at all, but we also have a pretty consistent narration around how people should be using their finances, and it doesn't necessarily match up with what I was taught or what I believe now. But the thing that sticks with you is what my dad just said, which is living a certain lifestyle, watching your parents do that, and then growing up realizing that this lifestyle was great. I wasn't deprived of anything growing up.
Looking at my daughter's views on money from the outside, of course, the original edition of The Simple Path to Wealth was published in 2016. And of course, the new edition, just about 10 years later in 2025. Um, I don't know that her views have changed so much as she has grown and matured. And as she's already said in some of her comments, she's, as an adult, when she came out of college, and even while she was in college for that matter, she more and more had an opportunity to practice some of these principles and to see how they worked. When she came out of college and started working and started investing in her own account in VTSAX, she could see how that process worked and how those investments would begin to grow. So I think it was more experiencing the reality of the approach that had just been an intellectual exercise maybe up until then.
I mean, also something that's a little bit more tangible because when the book first came out, I was in my early 20s. Now I'm in my early 30s, which is pretty significant when you think about growth development jobs. So I've had a few different jobs, few different promotions, different pay raises, and I have been able to actually practice what it's like to have FU money and walk away from a situation, a job situation because of that. So, to my dad's point, as an adult, you mature a little bit more about understanding money and the why behind investing, but it also being able to tangibly see it happen and put it in real use, I think is pretty significant compared to 10 years ago when I was just in my early 20s and just starting out.
It was never hard for me.
Yeah, it's funny. I have my parents when I was growing up a story about them saying no. I mean, they said no all of the time. And I was a kid. I was like every kid, a little outlandish, asking for things, seeing where the line was drawn, and they would draw the line, and then I would try again. They said no all the time. The most what am I trying to say? I think the story that we laugh at as a family the most, that most people could probably relate to because it was a really big thing, was I really wanted a car for my 16th birthday for no real reason other than that felt like the thing to ask for. When you turn 16, you get your license, and they said no, and there was no way. And I had even put together some sort of talking points about why I should get a car, and I took my dad out for food and tried to present them, and the answer was still no. Um, and yeah, it was just a very lavish thing for me to ask and expect, and they said no. And I think they said no for other things. I'm sure there were toys or things I don't remember or things I wanted to do uh that they said no to. Maybe dad remembers a little bit more clearly because he was the one that would have to say no.
Well, so first of all, in terms of saying no, in my defense, I have to say that your mother's default reaction to almost everything was no. And I was typically the one who would persuade her to yes, not all the time, but some of the time. But the car is the one that we laugh the most about. And I think it's because it was the biggest one. Again, in the neighborhood, in the town we grew up, it was routine for kids to get cars when they turned 16. And in fact, when Jessica was campaigning to get her car, I remember one of the things she said is, well, Dad, all my friends are getting cars. And I said, I'm sure that's true. And that's great because you won't have any trouble getting rides. And she campaigned to get a car for a long time before her 16th birthday. I think she started probably when she was 14, planting these seeds. And I just think buying a kid a car is bad policy. But she kept coming, and I'll give her credit. I mean, she was very persistent and kept coming up with new reasons. And then since the time Jessica was very, very young, I used to take her just in random times to breakfast or lunch, just the two of us. And so she kind of grew up with that. But just shy of her 16th birthday, one day she invited me to lunch. She's already referenced this, and that was new. That was unique. I'd always been the one to initiate it. So I knew something was up, and I kind of figured I knew what something was. And she had, as she said, prepared this really nice presentation about all the sound reasons that she should have a car. And I have to say, I'm sitting in the restaurant and I'm listening to her go through this, and I'm kind of impressed. And I'm almost tempted. I'm almost tempted because she's done such a good job. But when she finally finishes and she's looking at me with great expectation, I said to her, Jess, if you really want a car for your 16th birthday, I have to tell you, you've made one critical mistake. And she got very concerned and she said, well, what's that? And I said, you picked the wrong father because I'm never going to get you a car. But now, in fairness, she had ample use of the family's car, and the condition there was she had to play chauffeur to her mother. And as long as her mother first got to go everywhere she wanted and needed to go, then Jessica had ample use of the family car. And that worked out, I think, pretty well, right?
How fun is it that we actually get to answer questions, knowing that this opportunity wouldn't be here if I had just listened in the first place?
I love that. The little girl who wouldn't listen in both
I
statements.
did not listen, and if I had, we would not be here.
There'd be no blog. There would have been no Chautauquas. There would be no books. And we wouldn't be doing interviews like this together.